Welcome to Like-Minded Arts, where I've been going from hammer to Hollywood, and I want to help you go from being a struggling artist to being a working creative. Now, today I have a very creative individual with us, and I'm excited to share his story with you. Ray is a writer, a musician. Let me get this right. Ray Hartgen. Is that how you pronounce your name? Ray Hartgen?
It's absolutely, Brent.
Okay, good. I want to make sure I got that right. I get so many names wrong when I do these things. So Ray Hartgen, writer, musician, marketer, cancer patient advocate, and living in Southern California. I think that sounds like a very nice place. Throughout,
it's not bad at times. Not bad.
Yeah. What's your favorite part about South California?
Yeah, unfortunately, there tends to be a lot of people between where you are and where you want to be. So sometimes getting through the traffic can be a pain. But other than that, it's okay.
All right. Well, just to go on, Ray, throughout his professional career, which has spanned 5 decades, Ray has pivoted on many occasions from investment banking to pharmaceuticals, consumer electronics, SaaS software, and has one constant that run through your entire life, and it's been your passion for storytelling. And I want to talk about that a little bit later here. But you have written and published 5 books. One is Immaculate, How the Steelers Saved Pittsburgh, Me, Myself, and My Multiple Melanoma, The Indy 500, a year-long quest to win the greatest spectacle in racing, Revenue Orchestration, and Today's Era of B2B Sales and Marketing, and is your debut novel called Outflanked, which is an espionage thriller. That's a lot of different things. You've been around a very large block, Ray.
Yeah, I've been busy at times. Yeah.
So with the soundtrack of life playing continually in his head, Ray finds catharsis performing and recording his 2-piece acoustical band, the Chronic Padres. The Chronic Padres. That doesn't have anything to do with the multiple melanoma, does it? A play on words, or is that just?
No, actually, it's multiple myeloma.
Oh, myeloma.
Not to be confused with the skin cancer.
Okay, yeah, because this is a blood cancer, right?
Not
a skin cancer.
Yes, my cancer is a blood cancer. But no, my bandmate Scott came up with Chronic Padres. I'm not really sure how. It just sounded cool. And he's the father of 3 daughters. I'm the father of a son and a daughter, so we are chronically fathers. So Chronic Padres it is. It sounded cool, and we get to do a lot of cool stuff with sugar skulls and Dia de los Muertos types of imagery. So it's been a good name.
That's cool. Yeah, I saw the one video. I haven't listened to all of it, but I saw the patriotic one that you have on your website there. So cool. Well, Let's dive into a little bit of your background, your story. I want to start real young, Ray. When you first started out, I want to know when you were a little kid, because it says here that you were a lifelong lover of stories. But when you were a little kid, did you ever see yourself as a storyteller? What were your dreams when you were a kid?
As a kid, I wanted to, depending on what time of year it was, what type of athlete I wanted to be. If it was football season, I wanted to be a football player. If it was baseball season, I wanted to be a baseball player. And when the seasons overlapped, maybe I would have been like a, multiple sport type of person. But I grew up with a family who I grew up. My father was a military officer, my college educated. My mom's college educated as well. They valued an education, and they really valued books. My dad has probably the largest privately held military history library in existence. His home in Leavenworth, Kansas has over 20,000 books in it. And books were always part of my life growing up. I mean, they were everywhere. Every room had bookshelves, floor to ceiling bookshelves filled with books. And so there was never a lack of something to read around our house. And so it was, the value of reading, the value of learning, and whether it's through books or through magazines or what have you. I think, as a kid, letting my imagination run free, wanted to be a fighter pilot or a race car driver or, an astronaut or whatever. It really kind of depended on what I was reading at the time.
So, just an aside here, did any of that military jargon in your book Outflanked? Because I've been reading that, and you've got a lot of military jargon in there and a lot of knowledge on weapons and things in there. I mean, it sounds like you were in the military. I'm guessing that came from your dad's experience then, and him kind of passing that on to you.
Yeah, it came from my dad, and my dad was, like I said, a career-long military. We watched our share of war movies and war shows on TV, and the conversations they had. My father was my first beta reader for the book.
Oh, okay.
And so he was a person that was, able to give me, feedback and insight, particularly on, tactics. And, I can remember one aspect of, and you're probably there in the book, based on the conversations that we've had, Brent, and Father said, no, this is way too long of a time period. If it had been as I originally wrote it, it would have been a fatal situation, and the book would have been over after a couple of chapters, as opposed to having it further. So he was very helpful in that. But yeah, that background comes from just the interests and that we shared growing up. But my curiosity of what his professional life was like.
Now, how old were you when you actually started writing your first book?
I first started writing a book during the pandemic of 2020. I had written a lot of stuff before then, a lot of short form stuff. For I wrote about the San Jose Sharks for Yahoo Sports. I wrote a lot of blog posts for different that I worked for and the like. So a lot of short form things. But during the pandemic, 2020, so I would have been 56 years old. I started thinking, hey, I've got some time. Can I, what about some long form? What about writing a book? And so I experimented with kind of getting started with a bit of a novel, and I shared it with a friend of mine. And he goes, "This is like really good," and he gave me the confidence to keep going. I did not keep going with that book, though. That's been pushed off to the side. What happened is I started having a conversation with a friend of mine, Tom Olenek, and Tom is a Yinzer. And for those of you who in the audience are unfamiliar with the term, a Yinzer is a person from Pittsburgh, and Tom loves his city. And Tom's of my age. I'm 61 right now. He's about he's the same, 60, 61, 62. But for years he had this philosophy or this thesis that the city of Pittsburgh had to face this deindustrialization through the 70s and 80s, and it was their entire city was built on the steel industry, and that was going away, and it was a struggle. But they came out of that struggle smelling like a rose. Pittsburgh these days, for the last 20 years, it's been hoisted up as this new economy success story. This worldwide leader in research, technology, robotics, academia. They're a different type of city than all their Rust Belt cousins like Detroit and Cleveland and Buffalo and Akron and Gary, Indiana, and the like. And in Tom's mind, what gave the city the strength to persevere was when they needed heroes at their most, they found them in their Pittsburgh Steelers football team in the 70s and 80s. And he had this idea. And so, keep that in your mind, Brent, and audience. At the same time, I had recently been diagnosed with multiple myeloma. And multiple myeloma is a incurable blood cancer, yet is a treatable blood cancer. So I started undergoing treatment for that. But my timeline of activities and the like, and how I looked at my life, I'm like, hey, I'm not going to live forever. I've got an incurable cancer. What are the things I want to do, and who do I want to do it with? And, being a musician and always looking to make a few extra bucks at a gig, by selling a t-shirt with some sort of pithy saying in the back, I'm always on the look for a motto. And that first motto that I developed was, if not now, when? Tomorrow is uncertain. We're not promised tomorrow. So if we're going to do something, if not now, when? And so I grabbed my buddy Tom by the shoulders and I said, dude, you've been talking about this story about Pittsburgh, and you've been saying how it would make a great book. You've been talking to me about it for 10 or 15 years. You've been talking to your family for like 20, 25 years. If not now, when? I think I can write. How about if I start writing? And if we should veer off, of course, from your vision, we'll just course correct. But if not now, when? Let's get started. And you know what? After about 16, 18 months, we ended up, and to make matters worse, second favorite team, being a dutiful Texan, was the Houston Oilers. And they lost in the playoffs to the Steelers during that time period twice. And then my third favorite team was my mama's favorite team, the Oakland Raiders. And the Oakland Raiders lost 3 playoff games to the Pittsburgh Steelers. So yeah, the Steelers were like they were not heroes to me. They were supervillains. So
Your younger self would have been punching you in the leg or something.
Yeah, it's kind of ironic that I'm a co-author of a book that speaks so highly of them. But it was fun for me, the research going into learning that. Like I said, my buddy Tom, he's the Yinzer. I'm the guy from Texas. who grew up in the Midwest, didn't know anything about Pittsburgh and the steel industry and Western Pennsylvania. So going through that research process was interesting. It was intellectually stimulating. It was fun.
Well, it sounds fascinating to me, and like I would have always read the book on the steel industry and probably ignored the book on the football player. But it sounds like you can't read one without the other now, and so that does make me really curious. But let me ask you a question too, because before you actually got to, because that was in 2000, what was it, 2000?
Yeah, I think we started that book in 2021
Yeah,
and
2021.
finished it published in
So,
2023, December
so
of
not
2023. So I think we actually started in 2022.
Yeah, so not too long ago. So between the time you were ready to punch yourself as a kid and you started writing the Pittsburgh book, what kind of happened in between? Because you have a lot of history in there. I mean, one of the ones that
Yeah, it
fascinates
was
me, something about investment banking.
Yeah, I've made a lot of career pivots, and a big career pivot happened when I was in my late 20s and early 30s. I went back to graduate school, and I got my MBA with an emphasis in organizational development, and that the whole idea of at the time in the late 80s and early 90s there's this influx of kind of like Japanese business management principles, consensus decision making, self-directed work teams, and things like that. And that really interested me. And I had grown up, in a different environment, really. So being intellectually curious, I needed to retool myself and learn that. That's why I went back and got my MBA. I just, over time, I worked in a variety of things from organizational development consulting to human resources internally within an organization, and then organizational development internally within an organization, to corporate marketing, corporate communications, and public relations. Somewhere along that, Brent, I was able to articulate in my mind really the common theme. They seem like a lot of different jobs and a lot of different industries, but really the common theme was storytelling. It was engaging people around stories, whether it was an organizational assessment, whether it was a corporate marketing effort, a public relations effort. People, I think, inherently relate better to stories. They're more engaging. We strive to hear stories. When we're little kids, it's like, Mom, Dad, read me a story, tell me a story. And some of the best ways to get messaging across and narratives is, and certainly the most engaging way, in my opinion, is to be a storyteller, to really be able to hopefully pull on the emotions of your audience, because then they're really going to remember it. They're really going to be engaged. You're going to be vested. It's like, this is something I feel about, whether I hate it or I love it or some other emotion in between. I'm paying attention to it, as opposed to let it kind of go in one ear and out the other ear.
So I share your your feelings on the importance of story and things, and I guess let's get into some discussion on that though. What is it about story that you feel is so impactful that makes people, or that sells books even? I mean, whether it's fiction or nonfiction, how does story? I don't know how I should ask this. Well, I guess in your journey, how has story impacted you? I guess.
Well, I think it's super complicated, and you mentioned a great thing. It's like when it comes to selling books, I'd like to know more, because I sure like to sell more books. So if you've got a secret, let me know. But it's when you're communicating to an audience, you have to play to an audience, and your audiences will be different, depending on, circumstances, location, numerous circumstances, right? So whether you're a musician or writer or what have you, the first thing you have to do is capture attention. Right? We live in a very noisy world. So how do you just capture attention? And the rest of it is keeping attention, keeping that engagement. And, there's so many opportunities for people to participate in conversations today. Social media is a good example. It's not just about, talking, say like a brand through social media. Once they're like, hey, this is this, this is this, this is this. It's also asking questions like, what do you think, Brent? And talk back to me. It's a two-way dialogue. So, you want to have, as an artist, I think or as a creator, this ability to engage, and to even get to engagement first, you have to capture attention. How can you get people to give you a second, and what do you have to say? And then when you have this take, They could be a pretty short period of time. How can you add value? What are their interests? How are the ways that you can engage them? And I think one of the great ways of engaging is, asking questions and asking participation. It's like a simple poll, like a poll on LinkedIn, where it's like, instead of you just telling me something, how about you asking me something? It's like, oh, I'll tell you, how many hours a day I spend online or whatever. And then you begin to, create kind of a dialogue. And I think you find that through social media, through artists, let's try to make a customer. One customer today, and engage with somebody, and it's a mutually beneficial relationship, and hopefully they, at some point in time, they consume your product. They listen to your song, read your book or whatever, and then you read my book, Brent. I'm going to ask you what you think about it. And I really want to know, and I want, hopefully you say you're reading the Outflanked, my debut novel. I encourage you at the end of it, please leave a review at any bookseller site, and your authentic review. I'm not pandering for a 5-star review. I want to know, because once I talk to you about it, once I read your review, then I for the second book, and I've already started a sequel. For the second book, now I can start incorporating some ideas from readers. This is a collective effort, right? I need your feedback so I can be better, and make a better story that you're going to enjoy even more the next time.
That's an interesting take on it for me, because a lot of times you think of reviews as something where it's almost just a marketing tool where you're trying to say, yes, I have 100 reviews on here, and now I can start ranking or something. But what you're also saying is that you're using it kind of like the commentary section, where you can start to get a feel for your audience and maybe make some kind of connection there.
Absolutely. What people like and what they don't like, and it's, I think it's important when you take feedback as a creator, you should respond to all feedback, but you don't need to react to it, right? Just because somebody says it sucks doesn't mean it sucks, right? They just be having a bad day or whatever. So don't go changing everything just because somebody said something, but, you can begin to formulate some trends, and this is what, people seem to like fast-paced action, that moves, it's like, okay, that seems to be a comment that people talk about. So let's make sure, future works include, fast-paced action that moves, as opposed to, maybe a deeper insight into a character study or something that maybe bogs the story down. If you don't hear that, maybe your customer for this particular genre, for this particular book, might prefer one over the other. And and then kind of look at trends. I'm super curious about what people think. I know, Brent, I can write nonfiction. I've written 4 nonfiction books that I'm super proud of. But I wanted to see if I had a novel in me. I wanted to see if I could do it. And so, Outflanked, this new book, it just came out about 2 weeks ago, October 20th, for those of you who are listening later, of 2020. It's in the book, in the back. Tell me what you think about the book, because your reaction, not only do they help guide other readers, potential readers, to whether they want to give it a try or not, but it's going to dictate to me whether I write a second book. And I was sincere when I wrote that. I've already shared with you that I started a second book. That's because I've gotten positive response so far. I'm like, it's encouraged me to keep going with another a sequel, another line in the book.
I don't know if it's the same with you, but for me, when I started writing, it was like, at first I did it because I felt like I could maybe make some money doing this, but the more I did it, the more it was just an addiction that I had to feed. And I really love writing, and it's just one of those things that, I don't know, it's therapeutic in a way to express your creativity.
It absolutely is. I have discovered through my years of in the publishing, being through a published author, that it's not a great way to make a lot of money.
That is true. I've noticed that too.
Yeah, so there's not a whole lot of people making it rich writing books, but you talk about a cathartic effort. That reminds me of my second book. It's a memoir, a cancer patient memoir. It's called Me, Myself, and My Multiple Myeloma. And I had this. When I was diagnosed in March of 2019, I had really kind of like the privilege of being able to participate in some content being created through media, through national and regional media, articles and some videos. And, people, patients primarily, but also some caregivers who reach out to me through my social channels and ask me questions. They might be newly diagnosed or what have you, or had questions about treatment. And it was awesome. But I also recognized that it was a one-to-one type of interaction. then I was wondering, like, how could I scale this to be one to many? And I thought, oh, well, I've already published one book. How about if I publish a book about my experiences being a multiple myeloma patient? And then I could do this as a one to many. And it was cathartic writing the book. It was difficult at times, when you're writing a cancer patient memoir, you have to be completely truthful and
Putting
honest.
it all out there.
You also have to, a lot of people don't like to talk about their health, and here I had to be completely open and honest. And I also had to revisit some things that weren't particularly pleasant to revisit. Like a bone marrow biopsy. That test has a reputation, Brent, and it's a well-deserved reputation. It's not comfortable and something that nobody out in the audience should ever consider recreational or as a hobby. But, there was the stem cell transplant and the chemotherapy that went along with it, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. Right? But, it's a book that I'm proud of because not only did it give me this cathartic release to kind of like get it out, but it's also, I truly wanted it to be a value-added resource for patients, caregivers, and allies. And people reach out to me almost on a daily basis through social platforms, just like, telling me their story. And it's been the honor of my life, other than raising my two kids and being with my wife, Lori, for 30 plus years, to engage with these patients from around the world. Because of this book, I've had these, great conversations with people from Australia and New Zealand, South Africa, Turkey, Egypt, Iran, the United Kingdom, all across the United States. That's been super cool. And to have people like reach out to me and say, man, I am scared, but I also feel as though I can't talk about this to my spouse and my children, but I got you, and I'm like, I'm so super proud of being able to create these online communities that are a safe place for people to share their stories, because one lesson I've learned through my fight with multiple myeloma is that I am a firm believer that we individually, we are all stronger than we know. We can do this. But I also know that together as a community, we're even stronger still, and so being able to, when I've benefited from, patients ahead of me and patients with different types of cancer that have gone before me. When I've needed a helping hand, Brent, they've reached back and pulled me forward to where I needed to be or where I wanted to be. And I soon after I was diagnosed, I committed myself to being like one of those people. I want to be one of those people. There's a bunch of different ways I can go about handling my cancer diagnosis, but I want to be the guy that's helpful to the community. And if somebody needs my help and I feel strong enough that I can provide some help, I'm going to pull them forward to where they want to be. And it's been super cool. I wanted to create a book that was by the community, for the community, that benefited the community. And I think it does it. I'm super proud of this logo on the back of the book. My net writers proceeds go to the Multiple Myeloma Research Foundation. So, I hope I'm really, contributing to my people.
I think that's awesome. It turns you away from being a victim and to becoming an actor in your own life when things don't go right. I think that's pretty awesome.
I like the description. I haven't thought about it that way, but I want to use that for now on, if you don't mind, Brent. I'll
Go
give
for
you
it.
the...
I don't got a copyright on anything I say. Well, let me ask you a question. So, some of this, what you've been writing, has been very personal and fiction, non-fictional and stuff. But then you do something that is fictional. And how do you write both genres? Because, like for me, I prefer to write just fiction, and to me, writing something non-fiction almost seems a little more daunting than writing fiction because fiction is my comfort zone. It's where I go. It's what I usually like to read. I mean, I do read outside of fiction, but a lot of things I read outside of fiction seem so overwhelming. There's research to be done that that maybe I wouldn't have so much in maybe my fantasy world or something. But how is writing nonfiction for you different from writing fiction, or is it really that different?
It's a great question, Brent. I'm glad you asked, and it's also kind of like the opposite for me and you. For me, I find nonfiction to be easier. There is this this intellectual horsepower needed to kind of fight your way through the research and to learn, right? But what I have less of a fear of failure with nonfiction, but because I'm telling somebody else's story, or I'm telling a story that has happened. It's not my story. It's not my imagination. It's not what I have to create, right? So in the fiction aspect for me is it was a bit daunting to, I wanted to give it a try, but I was also a bit of afraid to give it a try. I kind of kid in my marketing efforts when I talked about Outflanked. Right at the bottom, it says an espionage thriller, because that's the category, the genre that it's supposed to fit in. But I kind of like joke, but it's only half joking. It's a joke that's based in truth. It's like, I hope you think it's a thriller. I hope it's thrilling. It says so on the cover. I mean, how humiliating would it be if it's not, right? And so for me, it was a bit more daunting, and it comes down to, the fear of failure, which I think a lot of creatives have. I've certainly always had it. There's just at times, though, you just have to overcome it and just say, you know what, it is what it is. I'm throwing it out there. I want the reactions, and some are going to be good, some are going to be bad, and we'll deal with that. But it's a shame, I think, when some people don't overcome that fear of failure. They don't want to get out there. I've been fortunate enough that I've had some encouragement. People say, oh, yeah, I like that song, or I like this, book, or what have you. Keep doing it. At the same time, you also get, people say, yeah, that's not for me, but it's okay. It's not supposed to be for everybody, right? I think, I really like, from the creative aspect, I like looking at graphic artists, in particular painters. Painting is another tough way to make some money, right? It's you really paint because painters really paint for themselves, right? And then they might start giving away things to people. It's like, oh, you like it, or you can have it. But it was, for them, it was like getting whatever they felt, whether it was a vision or a feeling inside their body. They needed to get that out onto their medium, whether it's a watercolor or oil on canvas, acrylic on a tile or what have you. They do that for themselves, and if there's a market for it later, well, that's great. But there's very few painters that are out there, like creating for a market. They're creating for themselves. And I think that's kind of an important thing for creators everywhere, is that, do it for yourself first, and then, if there's a market out there, that's fantastic. Let's try to exploit it in the market and see what you can, see what you can do with it. But, first things first, you got to be feeling good about it. Does that make sense?
Yeah, it does. And it makes me think, because like when I do my writing, I mostly write it for myself. I write like I've got one of my books that it doesn't fit neatly into a specific genre. Could it work for this one genre? Yes. Could it work for another genre? Yeah. So it kind of blends genre. It's really hard to market, but it's the story that I wanted to tell. And I mean, I hope that people enjoy it and that I don't have to be dead before they do start enjoying it. But yeah, I get it. A lot of this, you just have to just jump in and do it for yourself. But that also raises another question for me, and I'm sure it's one that you've probably dealt with a little bit. But you've had a sprawling career before you started writing. Do you still have any of those career ambitions, those things that you have to do to support yourself, or has your book started to actually help supplement your income? How do you stay financially solvent with art?
Yeah, for me, I am a freelance marketing consultant. Is how bills get paid. I will make. I can't foresee a time where it will switch around, where art will pay the bills more so than me working for corporate America as a freelancer. I don't. I mean, it's difficult to do. I make more and more money. I create more and more revenue from works. The more works I have, and the longer that it's been done. Remember, my first book was published in December 2023, so not even 2 full years into actually December 2022. Not even quite 3 full years into a publication of books. But yeah, it's a great question for me. I'm a freelancer, and I'll make way more money off of that than certainly the music. And on Spotify, I'll make less than $100 this year. So that's not even go buy groceries for Lori and I for a couple of weeks. Yeah. And one thing I did want to just fall back onto about your gender busting fictional work is that I really love it when creatives go out there and they kind of break down walls and barriers. I love it in music when people break away from verse, chorus, bridge, chorus, outro, right? That's like that's 97% of all songs written, and probably 99% of all country songs follow that format. I love format breaker. You see like a Elton John's Tiny Dancer, which is, that breaks a lot of rules, right? And so it's just, I enjoy it when, artists go out and say, this is what I want to create. I'm not going to like fold it into like a template that so many people have kind of created before us.
Well, it sometimes feels like the movie or the big movie studios or the big production companies or the publishing companies, they set the genres because they know how to market those, but really it's the individual artists who first came up with those genres or that first put something out there, and then they later pick up on it and learn how to market it, and maybe they call it a genre. I mean, I'm sure the first time a steampunk novel came out, they're like, what do we do with this? It's not really sci-fi. It's not really history. It's not, what is it? So, yeah.
And I like what you say about movies. I used to work for Sony, and and had through my public relations career there some opportunities to work with Sony Picture Entertainment. I can tell you that movies are a fascinating example. Nobody likes to make the money makers. The big tentpole movies, they're like, those are the movies that we have to make so we can make the movies we want to make. So you have this big movie studio that has the mainstream movies, but you also have these sub studios, so a collection like a Sony Pictures Entertainment, there's probably 15, 20 different studios underneath there, but some of them, all the small ones specialize in making these, avant-garde and noir films and, the films that they want to make, but they're able to do that because the studio put out Spider-Man and made a ton of money with it. They don't want to they make Spider-Man because they have to. What they really want to do is all the movies that they can make, all the art that they can make, all the films they can make because of the movie that they did make. Does that make sense?
Yeah, it totally makes sense. And I love that idea that they would do that. I mean, because it also it kind of relates back to what we do as self writers and indie filmmakers and things. I mean, your story fits a lot of what I've seen and a lot of what I've experienced in that your books, your stories, your art, it doesn't always, for the vast majority of us, it's not going to make any of us rich. I mean, there's a few out there that, they made it, they cracked it, but for a lot of us it isn't. We have to find a way to keep our house financially stable in some way or form, which is really what I'm all about, is trying to help people find that, help creatives find that. But even the big studios, from what you're saying, are doing that. They're putting out their big tentpoles to stay financially solvent, so they can actually do the art that the creatives in the company really want to do.
Yeah, and you'll hear them say that, these are the movies that we want to make, and it's important to make these movies that aren't going to make any money whatsoever, because that just furthers their interfuel and their passion, but it's also long-term legacy. It's like this is a company that supports the arts, and when you look at what we try to do from a I've had three of my 5 books have been published by a publisher. My last book, Outflanked, is self-published. But one of the ways I think to get things a little bit more financially feasible for creatives, particularly when they're exploring options like self-publishing, is what can you do outside of your comfort zone to make things sound better economically. And a good example would be the cover. If you go to a freelance, you can spend $1,500 on a cover for a book. That's a lot of books to sell to pay for the cover, right? I mean, you're going to need to sell 750 just to pay for the cover.
Right.
So what can you do to make that cheaper? What can you do to maybe self-design your cover? I self-designed this cover. I'm not a graphic artist. I think it turned out pretty cool, and I'm excited about it. But I know I have to sell a lot less books. I need to sell probably like 8 books to pay for my cover as opposed to 750 books, which automatically makes this entire thing a lot more economically feasible. And there's other things that go into it. The interior design of a book. A publisher will handle an interior design for the book. And I remember my first book, Immaculate: How the Steelers Saved Pittsburgh, is published by Morgan James Publishing. They were talking about interior design. I'm like, What do you mean interior design? I've already done the interior design. I wrote all the words. The words of the interior design. And they're like, "Oh, dude, you've got a lot to learn." And in fact, yes, I did have a lot to learn. And there's our design elements. You can spend like $500 on an interior designer on a book, easy. How can you learn to do it yourself? How can you learn to, what type of writer are you? Do you need an editor, or can you edit it yourself? Because an editor for a small book, a line editor, that's going to be another $1,000 to $2,000. And so if you start adding some of these things up, or stuff that you're either uncomfortable doing yourself, or maybe you're afraid of doing it yourself. Now you're looking at you need to sell a couple of thousand books to break even, just with the investment you have in there. So, I certainly encourage people to, there's so many resources out there to learn from, and overcoming that bit of a fear of failure. Are there some of these things that I can pick up on my own to do? And some, break some rules if you have to. Like, have you ever picked up a book of poetry where there's no punctuation and no capitalization? Yeah, and it's kind of funky and it's kind of cool. And you know what? And you also don't need an editor to tell you that you can't do that. It's like, this is the way I'm going to do it. This is my art, and you step out there and do it. So I encourage people out there to, you're already, as a creative, need to overcome this kind of fear of failure, but think about it not just in where your primary skills lie. Think about it in a broader term. It's like, how can I overcome my fear of failure of being a graphic designer to design the cover of my own book and save maybe up to $1,500 over an investment that I would have to pay somebody else to do it myself.
I think that's some awesome advice.
We've talked earlier, Brent, about the sad cliche of the starving artist.
Yeah.
Let's work on this together to see so we can all put some food on our tables, right? Let's work together. And there's another good example too. Maybe there's a way that, if you're a really good writer and somebody in your network is a pretty good graphic designer, it's like, what can I do for your business that you can do for me? Why don't you create a cover for me at the same time I create some word copy for you, drive business your way. Let's scratch each other's back. There's lots of opportunities out in the creative community for that. I love seeing artist cooperatives where, you get together people, like somebody might have the big graphic arts background, somebody else have the word copywriting background, put them together to be able to accomplish really cool things together.
And I think that artists are very open to working together. There's not so much of that fighting in art. It's a very supportive community. And
yeah.
And as we kind of talk about this too, I think it's really easy to get discouraged, because if you're wanting to write a book, you're wanting often to make money. If you're making a movie, especially, the upfront capital needed to make a movie even is just so astronomically high. A lot of these things can sound really discouraging, but I think you're right. I think there's ways that you can do this to save money, to make it more feasible, and to still follow your passions.
Yeah, and then there's always the patron, right? Like the way the art was created back in the Renaissance, where you just had somebody. It's like they're going to fund it for you. And I've known people that have made movies like that. Some of them some pretty big movies, including the movie Bottle Shock. I forget that Chris Pine is in that. It was one of his early roles. But a person in my network, Brenda Lormer. She was her and her husband were one of the producers of that movie. Not in it really to make money, but to tell the story that they wanted to tell about this winemaker in Napa Valley where they live. So there's always patrons out there. There's a lot of unconventional paths to get things done. Don't take no for an answer, right? You can get it done, and collectively. Like when I talked about cancer patients, being stronger than they know, and then the aspect that collectively they're stronger still. Yeah, the artist community, and I think you tend to see that, right? You see people support one another. Whether it's I was talking to somebody earlier today. When I see a musician playing in the street, I've always got a little bit of the Ray Hartgen Scholarship Fund available. Those are $1 bills to go into the hat or go into the guitar case or something like that. It's one musician to another saying, "Keep it up, brother. We're in this together."
I do the same thing with books. I read and watch a lot of independent storytelling, and I probably spend more money on that than I do on the big published names. So yeah. I get it. It's a really collaborative community. I guess let's dive into some just quick lessons you've learned here, and maybe we can. Feel free to elaborate on these. But my first question is, what lesson on your journey, your personal journey here, has meant the most to you?
a growth mindset, Brent, and I like to talk about, particularly my most recent part of my journey. That was the diagnosis with multiple myeloma in March of 2019. And when I was diagnosed, I had gone through a series of tests, progressively worse tests, and I was feeling like, kind of like a victim. You had said earlier, I had been tons of blood drawn, and I hate needles. The bone marrow biopsy, which was super uncomfortable, just flat out painful. I just felt I'd been punched around a lot, right? And so when I sat down with my doctor, first thing I said is like, Doc, I know this is the meeting. Tell me what I got so we can start fighting, because I'm tired of not fighting. I'm tired of just getting kind of picked on, right? And she goes, it's multiple myeloma. And there's an induction treatment. It's going to take 3 to 6 months for induction therapy. And then, hopefully we'll do a stem cell transplant. And I'm like, great. I'm an overachiever. 3 to 6 months stem cell transplant. We're going to do it in 3 months. I'm going to be in great physical condition. I'm going to, even up my workouts more than they are now. I'm going to take advantage of, nutrition, blah, blah, blah. Brent, 10 days into that routine of being the best cancer patient ever, went out to dinner with my son and my wife. It was a Friday night. And I was exhausted. We were at a P.F. Chang's, and I was just sitting there like, I am just beat, and I started thinking, and it's like, why am I so tired? I'm like, well, it's been a rough, week and a half or so, being diagnosed with cancer. But, I started recognizing that, when I woke up in the morning, pretty much the first thing I was thinking about was cancer. And I went to bed at night, pretty much the last thing I was thinking about was cancer. And then most of the day I was kind of thinking about cancer. And, I was physically exhausted, but I recognized there at the restaurant that, why I was physically exhausted is because I was mentally exhausted and emotionally exhausted. And I kind of went back to my musical roots with a mixing board, where you can adjust levels of bass and treble or, guitar or drums or what have you. You adjust these different levels. And I started thinking to myself, it's like, hey, self, my whole being is more than just my physical being or my mental being. For me, it's also my emotional being and my spiritual being. And I think, and I began to recognize sitting right there at that P.F. Chang's restaurant that, one of those things can be a strength that can pull up other factors that might be lagging, but then others can be so weak, it might pull down a strength that I had, and maybe me not tending to my emotional needs and my spiritual needs, maybe that was dragging down my physical and mental well-being. So, that dawned on me, and I was able to articulate that in my head. So, soon thereafter, with a couple of days, I was like, well, I just learned something about myself on this journey. What else can I learn? And so I fell back to this timeline exercise that I used to facilitate as part of a training course on time management when I was at Sony. And I facilitated this exercise, Brent, for hundreds of people. And it's a simple exercise. I want to share it with you and your audience right now. Whether you have a pencil and a piece of paper or not, it's a simple exercise. You can just use it. You can do this in your head. But you just draw a horizontal line from left to right. And then on the left-hand side, you make a little vertical tick mark. And on the right-hand side, you make a vertical tick mark. So you've created this line segment. And then on the left-hand side, you write the letter B. That's going to represent your birth. And then I think you guys are already ahead of me. On the right-hand side, you're going to write the letter D, and that's going to be your death. There's your timeline. Now, the introspective part is you just take a moment, and you know that tomorrow's not promised, but you just take a moment, and where do you believe you are on your timeline? Where do you think you are on your timeline? And so, Brent, when I facilitated this for folks, I used to just kind of like haphazardly just throw my line right in the middle. Because I was going to live, one, I was probably going to live forever. And number two, I was at least going to be 100, right? But here I am, I'm, 55 years old, diagnosed with multiple myeloma. And I'm like, hey, man, if you want to be, intellectually honest with yourself, you're a lot further to the right than maybe you thought you were, thrown up in the middle. So what does that mean to you? What can you learn from this? So I thought, you know what? What this tells me is that, like a lot of humans, I think I've been guilty of taking time for granted too often in the past. And I didn't want to stop there. It's like, if you took time for granted, Ray, how did it manifest itself? And I think, oh, that's easy. That came easy. Because I took time for granted too often, I took people and relationships for granted too often. And an example would be, it's like, hey, my dear friend Brent, I wonder what he's doing today. You know what? Brent's going to be here tomorrow. I'm going to be here tomorrow. I'll connect with him tomorrow. And then tomorrow turns into next week, and next week turns into next month or whatever, And so right there, I came up with that motto, if not now, when? Here I am on my timeline. What is it that I want to do? What do I want my legacy to be? What do I want to get accomplished? And who do I want to do it with? Who do I love the most? Who do I want to bring along for the ride? And that led to, if not now, when? What do I what do I want to get done and who do I want to do it? And if not now, when? And that's led into another motto for another shirt to make even more money at another gig, and that is punch today in the face. For me, it's a kind of a metaphor that motivates me. I want to capture today's attention. I want today to know that I was here, and so, how can I seize the opportunity? Because really, Brent, by addressing my journey with a growth mindset and being open to discovery of myself, I was able to, stop taking time for granted, or at least as much as I used to. Stop procrastinating. What are the things I want to do? What are the stories I wanted to tell? How do I want to tell them? And who do I want to tell them with? Who do I want to tell them to? I firmly believe that every day is a gift. And intellectually we know that not everyone gets to receive the gift of today. So how do we honor those people? How do we honor the day? And most importantly, how do we honor ourselves with this gift of today? What are we going to do with it? And for me, I want to seize the opportunity of it. And I think, to get back to your original question, what have you learned? I think it's approaching things with I had those challenges faced in front of me. What was I going to do with it? I wanted to approach it with a growth mindset, a mindset of discovery, like we were when we were kids. When we were kids, we used to walk out of the house every day, not consciously thinking, what can I learn today? We just learned because we didn't already have these life experiences, right? But then once we got to be a teenager, I'm using air quotes out there for those of you who are listening but not watching. By the time we were teenagers, we knew everything. Air quotes, right? And what are the things, as you get older and as you mature, what are the things you have to unlearn? What are the things you have to relearn? And what are the things you have to learn? And so I think that's important for all of us is, approach with that beginner's attitude, that wonderment of discovery, and what can you learn from it for yourself?
Well spoken. Very good. As an artist, what's been your hardest thing about being an artist? You've talked a lot about this growth mindset. You've talked a lot about all the positives of art. But is there anything about being an artist that is hard?
Yeah, it's a struggle of. There's so many catalysts for creativity that pop up. And what's it going to be? Is it going to be part of a novel? Is it going to be part of another nonfiction? Is it going to be part of a song? Right? And I probably have the beginnings or the ends, or sometimes it's the middle of 400 different songs in this book right here. It's open. Let me close it for you first. This is just one of many books that I have that have bits and pieces of stuff, right? And it's capturing these catalysts of creativity, but then it's finding the time to put it together, the energy. Sometimes as all you creators out in the audience know, sometimes it flows really fast, right? It's like boom, and it comes out. But other times it's a process, and you got to kind of work your way through it. And I think that's one of the things that I talk to a lot of aspiring writers about. So they tend to look at the end result. Man, I need like 70,000 words. I don't have the time to write 70,000 words for this book. It's like, maybe you don't have time to write 70,000 words for this book, but what if you wrote 500 today, and then in 150 days, guess what? You've got your 70,000 words, or 140.
And that's still less than a year.
Yeah, it's less than a year. So, don't look so far forward that you don't get started, but I think one of the challenges that I have a lot of times is getting started, but then, trying to finish. How do I take a piece of this song and a piece of this song and go, that's a pretty good idea. Together, that can be a completed song, right? And I think those are sometimes challenges. Sometimes I'll get so caught up in writing that I shy away from the guitar, where I do a lot of noodling for writing music, and that I've got to rededicate myself to Music Monday, or Monday is just for music, and work on that. But it's I think those are some of the biggest challenges, is having a lot of creative catalysts, a lot of starts, but how can you carry up that momentum and really build it into something that interests you.
So this isn't related to anything at all. I probably shouldn't even ask you now. I should probably do this off topic. But when you're doing music, do you write the lyrics first, or do you write the music first?
It's a great question. Both. It depends. Sometimes, you're just noodling around on the guitar, and it's like, hey, that's a pretty cool little riff. What is that riff? You know what that riff is? That's riffs about surfing. So then you write the words about surfing, and then you have a surf song, right? And then I think that happens for me 15, 20% of the time. The rest of the time it is, I just got this melody and but it's a word-based melody through my head, and it's like, oh, that's pretty cool. I want to write that down. That sounds to me like a chorus, and then the words come first. So, but a good question, and it's different for every musician. I mean, there's a plenty of musicians out there. I mentioned Elton John earlier. His writer Bernie Taupin, he didn't write music. He wrote the lyrics. He writes poems. And Elton John, he's the one that wrote the music.
Okay, so I think we probably touched on this a little bit, but is there anything that you would add to the idea of what is the most rewarding part about being an artist?
Another great question, which is why you do this, right? I think the most rewarding part, I think, tends to be intrinsic. It is, but when you have somebody that tells you, like, wow, I really enjoyed this, or it moved me. I mean, I remember, and sometimes it's not even in your own art; it's your interpretation of somebody else's art. But I've done covers of songs, where people, it's like, wow, that moved me to tears. My husband would have loved to have heard that, or something like that, and I'm like, wow, that's pretty cool. So, when you get those, words of encouragement, whether it's your work or it's your interpretation of somebody else's work, I find those super rewarding. But I also think there's this intrinsic reward that is necessary for a creative. It's like, if nobody sees this article I wrote for this website, I'm still proud of the work that went into it. That's a good article. I just wrote an article yesterday. It hasn't been published yet, but it's about tips on dealing with nausea as you go through chemotherapy. I'm proud of it, man. I can hardly wait till it goes out so I can share it and say, hey, I wrote this. Go check it out. And if no one checks it out, that's okay, but I'm still going to be every bit as proud of having written it.
Cool. What is your process for actually writing a book? I mean, because there's multiple steps in writing a book. What's your actual process?
Yeah, I am not kind of like an outline type of guy for the most part. So I like to just start writing. I read a book. Geez, her name is Sue, and I wish I could remember her last. Sue Shapiro. Her book I think it's called The Book Bible. But one of the things that that really struck me for this is that she's a writer, but she's also got a writer in her family. And, it's a brother-in-law or something like that. And she was one day, talking to him, and talking about writer's block. And her relative was like, hey, stop this pretentiousness with writer's block. I mean, plumbers don't get plumber's block, do they? No, they just plumb. If you're a writer, write. And, and for Sue was like, you know what? So what I try to do is 250 words every day before I even do anything else. 250 words is not a lot of words. That's, if you think you're a writer, you should be able to come up with 250 words. They might not be your final words. Later on you might edit it and do something different, but that's not a lot. But 250 words, and half a year later, you've got a book. So that's, part of the process is do a little bit and, just get started and keep going and keep putting one foot forward. I think with Outflanked, right at the very end, I got really stoked and I wrote maybe like a couple thousand words right at the very end. But most of that book was built, 500 to 800 words at a time, and trying to get those done and get it when you feel good. And I think it's important to do a little bit of writing every day, and I think it's also important to have some spaces that are just for writing. Whether it's in your office, your studio, or whatever, but this is where I go to work, not where I go to check emails and things like that. That's another place. Does that make sense?
Totally. What would be your two most important pieces of advice you would give a new filmmaker, or not filmmaker, a new artist, writer, creative, maybe musician, anything?
Yeah. If it's your passion and if you feel it, go for it. You're not doing it for somebody else. Going back to that idea of a painter or whatever, you're probably not going to make $1 gajillion. I hope you do. That's awesome, man. And if we do, can you maybe buy me a drink later or whatever? That'd be awesome. But you're probably not going to make $1 million. But do express yourself, whatever it is that you have inside of you, whatever medium you choose to do it, express yourself. And I think you're going to find a great deal of reward in doing that. So do that, and then don't take no for an answer, man. You've got sometimes in society, even the people that love us the most, they like to just tell us no, like, oh yeah, you can't do that. And I call them yeah butters, and there are people like, yeah, Brent, but. And then it's ... Yeah, Brent, great, you want to write this book, but what about this? You got to do, and they come up with all these excuses. Don't let those yeah butters get in your way of fulfilling your passion, fulfilling your dream. Go for it.
All right. So, Ray, I've got some just rapid fire questions for you.
I
These are,
know you do. I've
I,
listened to you before. I
I,
like the rapid fire.
I love it because it helps seal everything off. It gives us a quick little insight into who you are, and sometimes we glean a little tidbit of awesomeness out of this. So,
Good.
first question is, what is your favorite fiction novel? And by the way, the rules are can't pick your own book. What's your
I
favorite
would
fiction
never do
novel?
that. I would never do that.
I totally would do that.
I loved like the old Tom Clancy novels. I think one of my favorites is Patriot Games. That might have been his first one, but I really enjoyed that. I also liked I liked The Da Vinci Code by Dan Brown.
Oh yeah.
I love the common denominator of those things that you find out a little bit about history and you take deep dives into some interesting places or things like that I think make a good story. But yeah.
Cool.
Those would be like two of my favorites.
I love that too. I mean, it's really fun when you get a fiction author who actually does a lot of research and you're getting into it and you're actually learning something while you're reading, and that's kind of fun.
Exactly. You're engaged with the story, but you're just like, wow, I didn't know that about Cairo.
Yeah, yeah.
And I've never been to Cairo, but now I want to go to Cairo because I didn't know this was in it. But so I enjoy the aspects of that in all works, but particularly fiction works.
Cool. What about nonfiction?
Nonfiction, my favorite book is a book by Bill Bryson. I think it's called something along the lines of Brief History of Nearly Everything. Are you familiar with the book, Brent?
I have not heard of that one, no.
Bill Bryson he made his name originally as a travel writer. And then one day he's traveling back. He's kind of like looking out of an airplane at 35,000 feet going, wow, this is amazing. I'm flying like halfway around the world in a tube of metal and we're not falling out of the sky. How does that even happen? And so he kind of recognized that he did not have a scientific background. And so he thought, well, I want to learn more about the sciences. So he went on like a 3-year quest to learn a little bit about all sciences. And the end result of it is this brilliant book that is just, I find it fabulous. I'd encourage, I bought it as gifts for probably 50 people. I think it's a great book. It just, the characters, he goes into a little bit of, background of, scientists, of course, there's people like Albert Einstein, but there's also the guy in London who studied St. John's wort and only St. John's wort for 35 years.
Wow.
You're like, well, that's amazing, and it's a great book. So I highly recommend it.
Boy, one of the things about doing these interviews is my list of books to read has been getting so long.
Yeah,
I'm like,
that's a big book for you to contemplate because it's a brief history of nearly everything. So it's a lot.
maybe if I read that, then I won't have to read anything ever again.
Now I may have gotten the title wrong. So just remember Bill Bryson, Bryson. He's also written a great biography of William Shakespeare. He's a great writer.
Reminds me of a book. I can't remember the author of it, but it was a history of salt. It was fascinating. It was like the whole world, kind of like the history of everything, or at least the way you're describing it to me, but a history of the entire world from the perspective of salt. It just reminded me of that. It really intensely amazing book.
Hey Brent, I know this is rapid fire, and I'm breaking the rule.
I'm breaking my own rules too.
Another fiction book I really enjoyed, Andy Weir's Project Hail Mary. Andy Weir's the guy who wrote The Martian and Artemis. Project Hail Mary was a great book. They're making that into a movie.
I loved that book.
Make like $1 gajillion. You read that book?
Yeah.
Yeah, it's another one of my favorites.
I liked it more than the first book he did. I mean, it was fun.
Yeah, I didn't read was the first book The Martian?
Yeah.
Yeah, I watched the movie, and that's how I got turned on to him. If I'm not mistaken, Andy used to be like a software engineer who was a space nerd, and he started writing about space and self-published, I believe, The Martian. So if you're a creative out there, you got a book idea behind you, and you want to look at somebody who's made a ton of money off of it, you can look at Andy Weir with 2 major motion pictures based off his books, and these 3 great books.
Reminds me of another. I remember first reading Ernest Cline, his Ready Player Ones and things like that, and then several years later, they actually turn it into a movie. It becomes popular. I'm like, whoa! I thought he was just some small guy over here. Now everybody loves him, and so yeah, don't ever get discouraged.
I enjoyed both Ready Player One and Ready Player Two.
Yeah,
those are great books.
Yeah, and he's got one other. I'm trying to remember the name of that one. But anyhow, I'm getting off topic here. Sorry.
It's my fault.
You-
I'm sorry, Brent.
reach
It's my
through the
fault.
camera and punch me here for a second, okay? Did I ask you what your favorite movie is?
You have
What
not,
is
but
your
I will tell
favorite
you,
movie?
it's Raiders of the Lost Ark.
Ah, good movie.
Have you ever seen the documentary of these kids that remade it frame by frame, scene by scene?
No, I haven't. I didn't know that anyone did that.
It's absolutely brilliant because they age over the time, right? They start as kids with like camcorders, and they used every summer, every weekend, Christmas presents were stuff that they could make this movie, and then they made this documentary because they had to film the airplane scene, where they're the Nazi plane and Harrison Ford's fighting a guy and it ends up blowing up.
Yeah, yeah.
I mean, it's a serious scene, right? And you got to blow something up, and so that's the last scene they need to film. Here they are, all in their 40s or something like that. One guy's got to take time off of work; he's about ready to get fired. I don't know what the documentary's called, but if you are a fan of Raiders of the Lost Ark, you've got to check this thing out.
I need to look that up. Is it like a YouTube thing or is it an actual movie documentary?
It's an actual movie. I watched it on some streaming service. I'm sure you could probably also find it on YouTube. But yeah, it's a
have to look that up.
scene by scene fanboy recreation of it, and it's the documentary's awesome.
Oh man, I gotta check that out. That's gonna eat at me until I do now. All right. If you could have lunch with any actor, actress, or creative, who would it be?
Do that need to be alive?
Nope.
I think I pick Elvis.
Ah, why Elvis?
Yeah, Elvis was like my first musical influence. I was a kid, and I don't know what it was, man. I don't know what said, like, hey man, I need to get some Elvis Presley records. But all of a sudden, I need to get Elvis Presley records. And once I got one Elvis Presley record, I got more and more Elvis Presley records. So that's I just want to have lunch with the king.
So I know you probably don't do as much of the karaoke as maybe your own actual stuff. But if you, what is your go-to song? The thing that you just want to sing in the shower?
I like a show tune, "Swinging on a Star." I really think maybe Tony Bennett might have done it originally. Would you like to swing on a star like every moonbeam's home in a jar?
Oh, sounds awesome.
What yours? What's your go-to karaoke?
Oh, geez. I don't do So here's the thing. My wife actually forbid me from actually singing in church. So when I go to church, I mean, she's actually felt guilty about that.
And told me
she told me, I feel guilty. Start singing again if it really helps you, but please don't sing loud. But no, I don't know what my favorite one would be. I really dig Lobo. Are you aware of who Lobo is?
Uh-huh.
Yeah, so like the Me and You and a Dog Named Boo. Love Lobo. But I don't know. I tend to sing a lot of Christmas songs too, just because those are the ones that pop in my head. My wife's always getting after me for those too. But yeah, I like a lot of those old story type songs too. The Big Bad Joan. So yeah, those are fun to me. I really like those old classic country type things. But I appreciate all sorts of music though. Sorry, this isn't about me. It's about you.
I was on a boat not that long ago, and we were singing to Edmund Fitzgerald just as a kind of a like a dark humor of a boat going down. But those old storytelling kind of folkish types of songs, yeah,
those are my favorite. There's a Russian one that I just love. Oh shoot, I can't remember the name. I shouldn't have even brought that up. But yeah, they're old folk songs, awesome. Moving on before I completely demolish my own pride here anymore. What quote do you wish that you had written?
A quote that I wish I had written. A quote that I find myself. It's attributed to Mike Tyson. And that's it. Everyone's got a plan until you get punched in the face. But so it's a quote that it kind of like keeps falling back into my life. So this idea of like you're the best. Man plans, God laughs. That type of thing. But that's I kind of wish I had said that. Maybe that's a good question. I don't know. As soon as we're done talking, I'll probably end up with 1,000 other quotes. But,
that's it too. I'll probably remember that one band afterwards, and I'm like, oh, here's that one I like. All right. Well, we're pretty well done here, but before we do leave, I want you to make sure that everybody out there knows how to find you, who you are, anything that you want to add, or just let people know.
Yeah, if anybody out there wants to reach out to me, I love interacting with folks, engaging with folks through social platforms. I am Ray Hartgen at all social platforms. That's RayHartgen. That's my website, rayhartgen.com. My email address is rayhartgen@gmail.com. And all the social platforms, I'm Ray Hartgen, except for TikTok, where I'm Ray Hartgen 5. And I think that's because maybe I just got a little crazy when I was typing around with my thumbs. But yeah, I love hearing other people's stories, man. So yeah, you got a story that you want to share. And if you are a cancer patient caregiver, or a cancer patient ally, and you ever need anything from me, please reach out. Like I said earlier, it's a calling. It's what I do. It's the most rewarding, things that I've done. And it's been the honor of my life connecting with these, brave cancer fighters and caregivers and allies from around the world. And I would love to hear your story and see how I can help out in whichever way that I can. And if it's just listening, super pleased to do that. But yeah, if there's ever anything I can do for any of you out there, reach out to me. Love meeting you folks. Love listening to them. Love finding out what makes them tick.
Hey, Ray, thank you so much for joining me on the show. I hope that everybody out there got something valuable out of this, because I know that I sure did. And seriously, if you got anything out of this, check out Ray's website. Check out his books. His books are, I've been reading them. They're good. So check those out. And then,
I appreciate it.
Yeah, no problem. But it's true. If I don't like people's books, I don't actually say that, anything about them. When I review books, I give I give between 3 and 5 stars. 2 and lower, I just throw under the table, and I'd say, thanks, that was nice. I'm not going to review it. But no, I've been enjoying your book so far, so thank you very much for joining me here. And remember to like and subscribe, and hey, good luck in your own creative journey, folks.
Yeah, and Brent, I just wanted to tell you one last time, man, thank you for the opportunity. I like what you're doing with Light Minded. It's super cool, so it's been a pleasure being on the show. And if you ever want me again, man, I will gladly come back and chat with you, because I enjoyed it. But thank you again for the opportunity. Appreciate it.
Hey, awesome. Thanks. Till next time. See you guys later.